I am very happy to introduce Dan Hoffman and General Glen VanHerk. Dan, you may know as a Washington Times columnist. You may know him as a Fox personality, but you would also know that he is a three-time CIA station chief and sort of just spy extraordinaire. And we should thank him all for the service that he's had there. General VanHerk, in his last position, was the commander of NORAD Northcom, and before that, he was the director of the Joint Staff, where he was herding the cats of the Joint Staff within the Pentagon, an unenviable task. And before that, he had a very illustrious career, to include command of 2 bomber wings and the Air Warfare Center. So with that, let me introduce Mr. Hoffman and General VanHerk, and I wish you a very pleasant presentation.
Thanks, sir. All right, good morning, everyone.
Wow, those lights are really bright.
The lights are bright.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you can feel that literally, like right now, and probably figuratively in all of your assignments, I'm thinking. So we're going to talk a lot about the Golden Dome, and I'll just jump right into it. General VanHerk, you've written a lot of articles about the Iron Dome in the Wall Street Journal and recently in National Interest, and you've appeared on 60 Minutes discussing drone incursions into our homeland and the threat that is presented to our airspace. Back in January, the White House released an executive order titled Iron Dome for America. So just let's get started with a few questions about Iron Dome and Homeland Defense. To start with, why do you feel like we need right now to deal with this issue of missile defense? Why does the U.S. need an Iron Dome, and what sort of threat posture do you think we're looking at, and what would be the mission of this Iron Dome?
Well, you really need to defend your homeland. It's the thing that has made us prosperous, the most influential nation on the planet. It's what we do every day, the greatest nation on the planet here. So you've got to defend it. I wrote the first article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was titled "The Homeland Stands Unguarded," to educate folks that largely we're unable to defend our homeland today. You can have a little bit of capability for ballistic missiles with 44 interceptors expanding to 64 with the next generation interceptor. But you can't really defend against a large kind of attack. So you need to defend the homeland to make sure that we stay prosperous, that we're able to be that most powerful nation on the planet, but most importantly, so that the president has decision space, so that the secretary has decision space, Secretary of Defense as well. Once you get in a crisis, you can't look out there and go, well, gosh, we can't even defend our homeland. And the will of the people is going to be crushed at that point. I wrote the article in the Wall Street Journal for that reason, to educate the ignorant. I say that because I had a mentor tell me their ignorance is your fault for not educating them. To talk about, largely, we stand unguarded. Hypersonics, the commander of NORAD Northcom is not even tasked to defend against hypersonics, with the exception of a hypersonic cruise missile. And so many people believe that you're out there defending. We're not tasked. And by the way, if you don't have the domain awareness, as you heard earlier, you can't defend against them. So my ability when I was the commander to defend against a hypersonic was near zero. But the most important thing I did as a NORAD commander was provide threat warning and attack assessment. And you do that mission so you can have continuity of government, survive your nuclear forces, all for strategic stability. I would tell you that strategic stability is eroding based on a limited ability to defend, as specifically the PRC develops capability to hold us at risk, and the risk of strategic deterrence failure is growing. So to go back to your original question, why do we need it? For those reasons. Now, there will be people who say, will you rock the boat on strategic stability? Well, I would say we open the door if we don't defend ourselves, and when an attack on our homeland happens, whether it's a cyber attack that has significant effects, or a kinetic attack, whether that's conventional or nuclear, then we're going to have to respond. And you don't want the only arrow in the quiver to be nuclear weapons to respond with.
So one of the points that you've made is that defending all of North America and the homeland is neither affordable nor achievable. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and the challenge that poses?
Well, you don't have to defend every square inch of North America and our homeland. And I don't think, when you look at the wide array of threats, another reason I wrote the first article, Dan, was to educate that. And by the way, most of your conversation has been on ballistic missiles, a limited amount today on hypersonics. I was more concerned about cruise missiles and the UAS threat here on our homeland as well. So when I look at Golden Dome, I think of a vast array, from everything emanates from space, ballistic missiles, to hypersonics off of fractional orbital bombardment, to hypersonics that come off of ships, that come off of submarines, that come off of air platforms, that come off of land platforms, that come off of container ships parked in the port of Long Beach, California, as an asymmetric threat. We haven't talked about those kinds of things, but I think of Golden Dome as much more than just ballistic missiles or hypersonic missiles. So to go back to the question there, defending everything is a significant challenge. So I think it starts with policy. What must you defend from what specific type of threat and what nation? Today, we're not tasked to defend against China and Russia for ballistic missiles or hypersonics. The policy says in the Missile Defense Review, you defend against a rogue nation, a North Korea, or potentially Iran. And so we need to look at that as we go forward. I think it's unaffordable and unachievable to go bullet for bullet against thousands and thousands of potential missiles emanating from the PRC or Russia, and it's not required. That's why we have a nuclear deterrent. So we need to figure out, from a policy perspective, what does achieve deterrence by denial? How many bullets in the magazine to go after a ballistic missile or a hypersonic missile or cruise missiles? But if you get in a race to go after every potential threat to our homeland, it's going to become unaffordable and unachievable in my mind.
So that's what you mean by domain awareness. And
well, when I say domain awareness, I'm talking just being able to detect those specific threats. And I talked about space-based, I talked about air-based, land, sea, undersea. And so when I think of Golden Dome, we've talked a lot about space. Got to have the ability to detect submarines that can park themselves off your coast that can fire ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles as well. So Golden Dome is much more than just tracking missiles flying through space. It's about going after the person shooting the missile as well. And my strategy was not to defend and defeat here in the homeland. It was to generate effects through my fellow combatant commanders and our allies and partners forward and create deterrence effects before you have to defend and defeat here. That's a much better way to do it. And I would also rather interdict in the supply chain so that the missile doesn't work in the first place when they hit the button, not necessarily having to shoot it down from a space-based capability. So I see this as much more than weapons in space going after missiles flying through. It's a broader strategy that gives us the ability to create deterrent effects, if required, defeat effects.
so this is a whole of government approach. I mean, some of those things that you're talking about with the supply chain could involve Defense Intelligence Agency or potentially the rest of the intelligence community as well, supporting the effort?
I think it's absolutely a whole-of-nation approach. It's not just a whole-of-government approach. And I would even expand more, Dan. I would say that we ought to ask the question, you know, Canada's with us in NORAD. They have not funded what they need on their military. We ought to demand that you fund and you get into the missile defense business of North America. Defending our homeland is going to be much easier if we have the Canadians. And I would even go more broad than that. Our allies and partners globally. Defense of North America and our homeland does not start here. It starts around the globe with a network of allies and partners that feed us domain awareness, that we share of our domain awareness. You've heard on the earlier panels about the data and the information, artificial intelligence and machine learning. What I would tell you, I think that's foundational to whatever Golden Dome becomes. That the future is about the commander, the decision maker who has the right information at the right time to be able to make those decisions, whether it's a deterrent decision or a defeat decision. That requires sharing domain awareness. That requires sharing data and information across agencies today that are stovepiped. I should not have found out about a spy balloon coming into North American airspace less than 24 hours before it entered, when they knew about it days before. So we should share and make that information more available so that we have more options to create more decision space.
Yeah, that spy balloon story not extremely reassuring because I thought we'd kind of licked that stovepipe problem when we created the DNI, but it looks like there's more work to be done on that front.
I think there's absolutely more work to be done in sharing of domain awareness data and information. Let me give you an example. So you remember in 2015 when a gyrocopter flew down from the north portion of the National Capital Region right here and landed on the Capitol lawn. You guys remember that, right? Some of you? Well, nobody detected that. When I say nobody, I'm talking DOD, FAA, Capitol Police, Secret Service. Why? Because all their data was in stovepipes. We at NORAD went and got the raw data, applied machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms from all those agencies, and sure enough, you could see it. There it was, flying at treetop level all the way from the north portion of the National Capital Region. Why? Because the data was stovepiped. Okay, so much of Golden Dome doesn't require us to go build new sensors. It requires us to share available data today so that we can process it and make decisions. Let me just talk to our industry folks in the crowd. We have to stop building gadgets that are focused on a single threat, a single problem, and build them to go after multiple threats, multiple problems, to share data to solve them. So if you build a radar, it ought to see small UAS all the way to space domain awareness and hypersonics and everything in the middle. Don't build me a single radar that is going to go after one thing. And a lot of that is on us to share and make that data available.
So let's just drill down for a moment on the technology, on U.S. missile defense, just to address that. How much of an upgrade do you think we need? And what should the planning look like for missile defense going forward?
So great question, Dan. First, I would say I don't think the department acquisition process is set up to deliver the task at hand. I don't think a single service can deliver it. I don't think MDA, love my MDA folks that may be here, is the single entity to deliver that. I think it's likely a separate office with authority that's empowered to work across the services, across the agencies, with the COCOMs to deliver this capability. The biggest challenge, I think, in the acquisition process will be the integration and synchronization of all effects and all capabilities required to deliver this capability. If you get one out of balance, it may impact others across the entire spectrum of whatever we're going to deliver here. So I think there's some policy that needs to be set. We may hear that today. I'm hearing that there may be a czar for this. There may be something announced in the near future, and you've probably read the articles that speculated Mike Gutlein, the Chief of Space Operations. I think there's, I'll get to more of your question in a second. How do you see to this? You know, there are people posturing right now to go after pieces of this. So, you know, space-based piece. No, it needs to be a single commander who is empowered and charged with operating all the way from the space-based capabilities coming after the homeland all the way down to counter UAS and everything in the middle. If you bifurcate this with multiple commanders, we create bureaucracy and we create challenges to command and control and the decision-making process. So all that will certainly be sorted out. I think that this will be fielded over time. I happen to support Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab and the discussions. Any Johns Hopkins folks in here? Don't see them. We've talked, we think that with current technology and capabilities, We could stitch together in 3 years and deliver a nascent capability to go after the problem set. The challenge is going to be the long-term space-based capabilities that generate effects from space, whether they be kinetic effects, non-kinetic effects with the use of directed weapons, energy, those kinds of things. That's probably a longer-term challenge. But the technology to solve this problem exists today, just not necessarily fully fleshed out with regards to putting it on orbit in space.
So to continue the discussion on the challenges we face, you talked about technology a little bit. Maybe you can address, in addition to leadership and having one person in charge, budgetary issues that may impact, as well as our adversaries. You noted we've got China and North Korea, Russia, potentially Iran, and non-state actors that we have to deal with. Assessing our adversaries, I imagine, also a critical piece of this. But maybe you could just go into more detail about your assessment of the challenges that we face.
Well, I would tell you that not only does the department acquisition process, and by the way, Senator Sheehy made a great point that this may fundamentally change how we acquire in the department. I think that's something we ought to look at and change. But when you ask the question about the budget, I would go to Congress and go, I think our budget process of a 5-year FYDP and a 1-year budget where the money shall not cross without a long process to get approval of Congress has to become more flexible. When you are dealing with software-driven capabilities, data and information capabilities that update themselves every 4 to 6 weeks, we have to be able to go faster, change money across colors to operate within that environment. So I think there's some regulatory things that need to change. I fully respect the congressional oversight responsibility, but it has to be able to go faster. I think Congress has to accept failure to go fast. We can't have a 2 or 3 year investigation every time we have a failure. Okay, the bottom line is to field this capability, we're going to have some failures because we're going to challenge the status quo, we're going to challenge technology. That's okay. The PRC has a failure, they just get on the horse and ride again. We can do the same kinds of things as we go forward. The second part of that question was, I forgot that.
We talked about budget, which you highlighted, and then other challenges, technology and the leadership part of it. I'll actually, maybe to dive in more deeply into one other aspect about our adversaries. Back when I was studying political science 100 years ago in college, we talked about mutual assured destruction, and the concern about President Reagan's Star Wars program was that we would render ourselves safe and then eliminate this mutual assured destruction that kept the world safe, arguably. It was a theory, and you could debate that, especially nowadays when you've got a rogue regime like North Korea with the potential to strike the homeland. So I just wonder how you assess that element of the strategy involved in building out the Golden Dome.
Yeah, so there are those who will say this will disrupt strategic stability because you take away mutually assured destruction. Well, as I said earlier, I don't think it's affordable and achievable to go after every single 1,500 missiles or warheads that can come from Russia. And as China now builds out to have 1,000 by 2030 and then more, I don't think it's realistic to go after all those. So we should have a strategy, and we should make it open and tell the world this is deterrence by denial. We are developing a capability to hold at risk a limited number from anybody that gives us the situation where if you are going to attack our homeland, then you do have to launch a massive strike, and therefore we will see that, and that's the mutually assured destruction piece that stays in there. But what you don't want them to do is have the ability to have a small attack, nuclear or conventional, that can take away the decision space, and now you find yourself in a situation where they're able to manipulate you when you don't have an ability to defend yourself. So we need to find the sweet spot and what the number of capability and capacity is, and it not only needs to go against the ballistic missiles, which may be nuclear or conventional, but everything all the way down to counter UAS, but especially the cruise missiles, the hypersonics that are so crucial. Today, and you heard the last panel talk about it, providing threat warning and attack assessment for hypersonics is really tough. And when the PRC and others have blurred whether that hypersonic is nuclear capable or it may be conventionally capable, you have to make some decisions. Are we under attack in our homeland from a nuclear weapon? If you are, and you make that assumption, I would argue that strategic stability has vastly eroded because of the PRC fielding conventional hypersonic capabilities to strike our homeland. And so that's a different problem set.
Yeah, I think the other argument against that, against this idea that we would hurt or create instability, the other argument against that is that we have to be careful to apply a rational actor model to all of our adversaries. The Russians could go back and look at their own history of almost cooking off a nuclear war with their dead hand strategy on nuclear weapons. They could launch one because of their rigid, bureaucratic nuclear infrastructure and their command and control. So this system would be designed to eliminate that sort of human error, which I think is something that we also need to consider.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And by the way, a human always has to be in the loop making the decisions.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree that artificial intelligence, machine learning can help us, especially when you have large numbers of weapons come in, when you have companies out there that can do basically autonomous generation of weapon solutions. But the human always has to be in the loop, and that has to be publicly available. But you can't have a dead hand where we see a launch, we're going to launch capabilities like nations around the globe have considered or may consider putting in place. Putting nuclear weapons in space. Those are things that are on the doorstep here as well. I think we should approach this from a rational actor and be the responsible nation on the planet as we do it, and convey why we're doing it, and put the strategy out for everybody. But just to say we're going to field Iron Dome and we're going to field Golden Dome, it's going to be big and beautiful, is not the strategy. We need to come up with how are we going to employ it, why does it produce stability for our nation, why does it produce stability globally? And I think the argument can be made.
Is it possible to give us an idea about a timetable? How long would it take to build it out? I would assume it's a dynamic process, meaning whatever we build in the coming year or years is going to have to be improved upon looking, in the out years. So I wonder how long it would take to get this up and functional. And then the second question is which agency would run it? We talked about a specific person in charge. I served a bunch of years in Russia, and so I'm not a big fan of using the word czar. Things didn't end too well for them, and that's their history, not ours, so we could find our own word for that. But clearly somebody needs to be in charge, and if so, from which agency?
So for your last question, in charge of operations, is that what you're talking about? Employment of the system?
Yeah.
So it needs to be a single command with a single commander in charge, in my mind. You can't bifurcate it. I would put it up to the leadership. What is your intent? If this is about defending our homeland from threats undersea to on orbit, then today we do that through the NORAD and NORTHCOM commander. Okay? If this is something we're going to field that is going after space-based threats only, and that's the policy decision, then I would give it to the SpaceCom commander. But don't give it to multiple commanders is what I would say. That would be a terrible idea in a matter in crisis. You don't want to have to work across multiple commanders to try to figure out what your decisions are going to be. You need to empower one commander. As far as fielding it, as I said, I think there is technology today that could field a capability within 3 to 5 years using terrestrial base. I didn't talk about something that's very important, by the way. Today we're set up to go against threats that emanate from north and over the pole. But those threats are rapidly expanding off east and west. In the southern hemisphere, missiles now have long range where they can actually be launched on a southern trajectory and approach our nation from a direction that we're not set up to defend. So those are things that I think from a technology perspective can happen relatively quickly. The challenge with much of this is if you're going to have a location to field these capabilities, then you have to have an environmental study. Environmental studies typically take multiple years to field, and you can't start development of the technology until that environmental study is done. We should ask ourselves, is that process too cumbersome, too long, and do we need, for national security purposes, to look at revamping how we do things? I don't know. The environment's important. I'm not making that decision, but I will tell you, if you have a 10-year environmental study, we're not fielding national security capabilities fast enough. So we have to work together as a whole of nation, a whole of government to field this. I think the space-based capabilities, you have better people to answer the technology question than me. But from everything I'm hearing, we're a decade away or so. And somebody may counter me on that one, and I welcome the feedback, because my ignorance, they should be educating me as well on that. But I don't think we're going to field it right away. I think it's going to be in that 5 to 10 years.
So directing the process whereby we get to the end state where we have the Golden Dome up and running, is that out of the White House? National Security Advisor makes this a priority, works with bipartisan members of Congress to get the funding and ensures the collaboration within the U.S. military and then between the military and the intelligence community? How does that work out?
Well, I think the White House has to make it a priority. They've done that. The president's been very clear. If the president makes it a priority and his National Security Advisor follows on with the National Security Council, the departments will follow along. What you can't have is nobody across the river leading the effort. The thumb has to be maintained on it, but they don't need to be making the decisions. They need to delegate that and have somebody responsible to them for making the decisions and implementation. Okay? Congress has to be part of the solution as well. Congress needs to work together. We're too divided. Too many decisions are made on what's best for the party, not what's best for the nation and our national security, and we should demand more of them. When they get up here and tell you all the problems that they've heard and they've seen, I just want to ask, well, I told you those for my 4 years in command. Why didn't you do anything about it for the last 4 years when I was telling you? When I submitted you posture statements, go back and look at them. What'd you do with those posture statements? Put them in the trash can? Magically now it's a priority for them. Why wasn't it a priority in August of 2020 when I took command? Ask them the tough questions. Oh, by the way, I didn't get through why I went and I did the 60 Minutes interview, and I didn't talk about why I wrote the second op-ed on Golden Dome. I wrote it after President Trump put out his Iron Dome mandate, if you will. That second op-ed I wrote, it's in the national interest, is basically a new future for Homeland Defense. Think about Homeland Defense differently. I wrote it because I got really frustrated after the president put that out when bills were being proposed in Congress to spend $16 to $19 billion to buy technology from 20 years ago. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we do. What we needed was a fresh start to Homeland Defense, not to buy equipment to put in my state because it's good for my constituents. I got frustrated, and that's why I sat down and wrote that second one. I went on 60 Minutes for a reason, okay? I got frustrated by the lack of education on the drones, especially in New Jersey, but also I was in command during Langley, by the way. That happened to me. But everybody's assuming the government's not telling you the truth. They're asking the wrong questions. Why aren't you telling us the truth? Why aren't you telling us where these drones are from? When the question should be, so for the last 4 years, the commander of NORAD and Northcom said he doesn't have the domain awareness or the capability to defend the homeland. Why have you not given him the capability? Why have you not put policy and law in place to be able to go after the domain awareness, to be able to collect signals within our homeland to know where these are emanating from? Those are the damn questions that people should have asked instead of, why are you not telling the truth? They weren't telling you because they didn't know, folks. Ask the right question.
I think this is a great place to end our enlightening conversation. If there's one thing we know in this town is there's a lack of bipartisan collaboration, but it's precisely on this sort of issue, if you're someone with even a touch of optimism, perhaps, that Democrats and Republicans can come together in our nation's interest. So I think it's just critical, and I think all of us can be grateful to you for removing the scales from the eyes of those who need it on Capitol Hill. And hopefully when we meet up again down the road, we'll have some positive development. But thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. If you haven't figured it out, I'm pretty passionate about this topic, so thank you.